Yes, the top 10 Blue Note jazz drumming vinyls brought to you here today. Greetings, welcome back to the channel. I'm grateful you are here today, that you will spend a little time with me to talk about jazz drumming records, jazz drumming vinyls, and that of the Blue Note variety. And all these records I'm going to talk about today are just great records, regardless really of the drumming on them. They are 10 of the, I think, the greatest records that are on the Blue Note catalog, and they're sort of divided up between hard bop, which is the meat and potatoes of the Blue Note recording experience, obviously, and more progressive records that really, it's pretty surprising that Alfred Lion and Francis Wolff even signed, because they were reacting to the new thing. They were reacting to Ornette Coleman and what was happening in the early 50s, late 1960s, upon musicians who wanted to stretch it beyond even post-bop. And I guess I have one post-bop record here, but they were farsighted enough to see what was coming and to pick the gems, really stuff that was already on their label, or artists who were on their labels but who were pushing forward. Let's start out with one of the unqualified masterpieces of the Blue Note label, Hank Mobley's Workout. Grant Green, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and the great Philly Joe Jones. Philly Joe Jones is one of the great architects on the Blue Note label, the most illustrious and illustrative drummers on the Blue Note label. He just had a beautiful way of phrasing. He had incredible rudimentally based technique. Drummers learned the 26 rudiments, and boy, you know, there's a book called Charlie Wilcox and Rudimental Swing Solos. And it's almost like Philly Joe took that thing and dissected it, inhaled it, and then spread it on the drum set, because he played such beautiful ideas, and you could tell he had a lot of style, a lot of class, and, you know, not to mention a drug habit, but he invigorated every session he played on, and brought such a beautiful sense of flow and artistry and power and serious hard bop swing. I mean, a great record that he's on that is not Mobley's Workout, but I think of Billy Boy off Milestones, just an amazing brush workout. Or the last tune he ever played with Miles, which is on a twofer. It's called, is it Two Bass Hit? I think it is, or is it Love for Sale? It might be Love for Sale. At the end of it, Miles and Philly Joe Joe are trading 4s, 16s, 8s, and it's just wild. He had a grand sense of humor, a grand sense of life, and this is a blistering record, start to finish. And I actually don't hear it talked about that much or seen it posted that often. For people who love Hank Mobley, they tend to talk about No Room for Squares, or Soul Station, which I equally love, Caddy for Daddy, which is in this group somewhere. But this one is like a pure blowing session, and man, they're on fire. And this is some of the best Grant Green I've ever heard as well. Art Blakey is one of the bedrock drummers, one of the bedrock performers, recording artists on Blue Note, and there's a lot of different records to choose from and sort of different styles, but this is one of my favorite. Art Blakey and the Jazz Masters, Buhaina's Delight, Freddie Hubbard, Wayne Shorter, Curtis Fuller, Cedar Walton, Jimmy Merritt, Art Blakey. It's an interesting lineup. People sort of lionize the Lee Morgan lineup, but Freddie was a powerhouse. He was really the next step in trumpet beyond that really lyrical flowing style Lee Morgan had. I think about Freddie Hubbard's Open Sesame, which I think is his debut on Blue Note, and it's very sweet and wide-eyed, open, beautiful ballad playing, but he was a much more aggressive player, hard-edged, hard bop, and this is a great example of that. Plus, these are wonderful tunes. You know, Art Blakey's style is powerful, emotive, fiery, all those incredible buzz rolls and tom thumping and cymbal smashes. You know, he was just a pure gyration machine. And this album is a little subtle, a little more subtle than things like Moanin', which is probably the most popular Blakey record. There are so many Messengers records on Blue Note alone, but this is just one of my favorites. And then for Art Blakey, the sheer pugilist, you have to consider Orgy and Rhythm, and Holiday for Skins, which is Art playing in more of a percussion troupe, percussion ensemble situation. These two records have Philly Joe Jones, Art Taylor, Ray Barretto, Specs Wright. Now there's a guy who didn't get a lot of coverage on drum. Sabu, Julio Martinez, and these are really, really fun records. If they a couple tracks might sound a little dated, but to hear his full passion, this was sort of the Back to Africa thing. You cannot beat these records. They're fun, they're powerful, and they're really hard to find. This is a West 63rd RBG half D Group P pressing I paid $100 for. West 63rd Liberty RBG I paid $30 for at the Jazz Record Center. Elvin Jones is another bedrock drummer on Blue Note. He played with all his own groups. He played on a lot of Wayne Shorter records that I love. My favorite Blue Note record is probably, my two favorite Blue Note records are Wayne Shorter Night Dreamer with Elvin and Hank Mobley Soul Station with our Blakey. They're like opposite poles of that beautiful catalog. But and so there are many records to choose from with Elvin. This is my favorite, maybe, putting it together, the new Elvin Jones trio with Jimmy Garrison and Joe Farrell. And it's just a prime example of Elvin all out, flowing, burning. And this is a great trio. He did so much great work with Joe Farrell. The ultimate Elvin Jones, I believe, is the same trio. And it's just Elvin in his prime, in his beauty. I'm not sure what year this is. I wrote it down. This may be 67. But this is just a classic record. Classic, great Elvin. How Elvin can play the way he played in a suit and tie is beyond me. That's what those guys did. Max Roach is one of the founding drummers in jazz, really. He is the essential bebop drummer, dating back to Charlie Parker and Tommy Potter and Dizzy Gillespie. And as such, he is a generation behind most of the drummers we're talking about. I understand his bedrock position, but for somebody who's bedrock, I appreciate Max Roach, but I love Kenny Clark. Kenny Clark, to me, his drumming is timeless. You play it right now on any of those great Savoy records, he's playing with such beauty. It's just remarkable. But Max Roach is so important. If you're going to know where jazz comes from, you have to realize the importance and the contributions of Max Roach, and I love him on this record. Sonny Rollins, 1542. This is a great Sonny Rollins record. This is an original that I paid $250 for at the Jazz Record Center. The spine is definitely not perfect, but it would have gone on auction. And this is weird because it's 1500 series, so it's done at Hackensack. Let me take a sip of my fine beverage. And I think of the other drummers who recorded at Hackensack, obviously Philly Joe Jones, Kenny Clark, Shadow Wilson, who's a wonderful undiscussed drummer. But you can definitely hear he's from the older school on this record. If you just listen to his ride cymbal, it seems like it's so low in volume and it doesn't have a lot of definition. You know, it's more almost like a timekeeper within his set while he does other things. There's a track on here called Decision where he plays so beautifully. He's playing brushes, I believe, or it might be mallets. And there's amazing accents in certain places. And of course, this is an amazing record for Sonny Rollins. I think this is my favorite Sonny Rollins. Max went on to play on a number of Sonny's other records on Prestige. I believe he's on Saxophone Colossus. He might be on the Freedom Now suite. But I almost think Max Roach's place in jazz history is really as a voice of social reason. When you think about the albums whose names are escaping me, the one has the cover of the Greensboro Sit-In, and he had two pivotal albums that spoke to the civil rights movement, and those are really important. And his drumming is just a little square. It's always on the downbeat. It's very contained. Even when he gets to really play, he's playing single stroke rows always on the downbeat. He's the bedrock dude. I almost prefer Max. I definitely prefer Max on the M Boom records, mostly being Collage, which I think is on Soul Note. That's an incredible, again, a percussion ensemble with everybody you can think of, including Joe Chambers, who I'll discuss here in a minute. But that is just a masterpiece of recording quality, of space, of arrangements. You should really look for that record. It hasn't been reissued. It's on Soul Note. M Boom did a couple of records on Columbia, but they just don't speak to me in the same way that Collage does. Of course, you must talk about Mr. Happy, the bobblehead of jazz drummers, Billy Higgins. Billy Higgins, I think his drumming is sort of centered around the pulse of his ride cymbal, because his ride cymbal is so happening and so joyous, and there's so much air in that ride cymbal. And he was always smiling all the time. It's like you could bring him to any session and he'd light up the session. I think he was probably he made 8 albums of his own on various labels. but I think look at Tony Williams, he's a very serious cat. At least when he's drumming, he's really focused. He's got this Hawkeye thing going on. And Elvin was very joyous, but a giant, larger-than-life personality. Art Taylor, who I'll talk about, or Joe Chambers, a little more contained. But Billy Higgins was just a force of nature, just like bringing in a thunder, bringing in a high gale wind into your session. And he's fabulous on a Caddy for Daddy. He's also great. He's equally splendid on Dexter Gordon Clubhouse, which has recently been reissued. Donald Byrd Blackjack with Hank Mobley and Sonny Red. Slow Drag, which is very recently reissued. This is an original, which I paid $40 for. Back in the day when they did that, briefly did the gatefolds, which are just a blast and a lot of fun. Let's open up the gatefold. Donald Byrd was a serious composer, a serious cat, an unlike Lee Morgan. Well, there he is right there. You see, there's Billy smiling, Mr. Happy. Unlike Lee Morgan, he lived quite a long time, so we got to see his evolution and hear his evolution from the through almost bringing gospel choirs into the music, and the Mazzell Brothers. I love all that stuff. Fantastic. Two albums that involve the incredible Elvin Jones are two of the greatest albums on Blue Note. I think two of the greatest jazz albums of all time, Larry Young Unity and The Real McCoy Tyner. Joe Henderson's on both these records. That's a big part of it. I've actually made this video over a couple of times. My battery kept going dead. And I thought to myself, what separates these records from Elvin's canon on his own records or his records with Coltrane? For some reason, I think these compositions require very tight arrangements, and they require the drummer to illustrate the intros, the melodies, before the solos. And so we get to hear Elvin sort of as a studio drummer on both of these records, playing in a very defined situation. Like the Woody Shaw tunes they cover on Unity are very defined. You just can't play through the head, keep time, which is what he did, I could be wrong, on a lot of Coltrane stuff. With Coltrane, the heads aren't like dap 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 dum dap dap dum dap dum ba. They're not defined like that. They sort of rise up from the ether and flow and take over the room. And more often than not, Elvin is playing more that way and not so heavily defined. But both of these records, man, he just sounds wonderful. And these are just tremendous records by both these guys. This in particular is a landmark. And you really get to hear Elvin on fire in an organ trio situation, essentially. And the great trio, McCoy, Tyner, Ron Carter, and Elvin Jones, augmented by Joe Henderson. These are incredible records. Blue Note was very, very forward-thinking. That, you think about it, Blue Note started out with Sidney Bechet. That's their first star. Their second star is Jimmy Smith, organ trio world. Then they hit Lee Morgan and Sidewinder. Then the label blew up, and the label we sort of recognize now. But they were forward-thinking enough to recognize what was happening with the new thing, with Ornette Coleman, with the music that sort of addressed the civil rights, and even later that referred to more of the Black Power movement, if you want to say it. Like, actually, Eddie Gale, Ghetto Music, I think is being reissued this week. That's one of those records. But I think about the records with Tony Williams, where he's so amazing, and this is one of them. Grachan Mancour, very, 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 very playful music, a lot of space, a lot of air, and similarly, Jackie McLean, One Step Beyond. These are very sparse records. These are sparse melodically, and they're wide open for improvisation. And you're hearing a young Tony Williams. You got to start with Jackie McLean, just so focused and so revolutionary and evolutionary and driving, and the amazing idea. His ideas were just so revolutionary and different. A lot of crosstalk between snare drum and bass drum in a way no one had heard of before. His explosive way on a ride cymbal, he could ride it, bash it. He wasn't afraid to take it way out, which is funny because on Lifetime and Spring, his two Blue Note records, they're very almost like chamber music records. There's a lot of extended soloing unaccompanied. But there isn't a whole lot of ding da da ding da da ding da da ding da da ding on those two records. That's why I don't include them here. But both of these are prime examples of Tony in a swinging ensemble burning down the house, as well as on Grash on Mancour, these are all wonderful records. Joe Chambers was another guy with Art Taylor, with Billy Higgins, with Philly Joe Jones, that were like house drummers for Blue Note. And but he was very much, you know, I've interviewed him once. Joe Chambers seemed very introverted, not shy, but just sort of almost sullen, to tell you the truth, back then. He's the guy who told me there was cocaine on all the Blue Note sessions back then. But I think of him more as an orchestrator. In our interview, we talked about the leitmotif in Jaws. Dum, 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 dum. And you know, the underlying pivot point between the music, and that's what his drumming is. It's kind of a pivot point. It kind of addresses everything. It holds everything together. He's like the glue, and he's wonderful on Wayne Shorter's Schizophrenia, Contours with Sam Rivers. He's great on a bunch of records, but he's much more subtle. He has less of an overt, garrulous personality as Tony or Philly Joe Jones or Elvin. He's a little more contained, but you know, he's on a lot of Wayne Shorter records, Bobby Hutcherson records, and he just lays it down. He's got this pristine forward motion time feel. It's really wonderful and important. A guy who I think maybe didn't even know how great he was, another bedrock jazz drummer, is Art Taylor. This is his album AT's Delight with Dave Burns, Stanley Turrentine, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Potato Valdez. And one of the very few drummers where there's a conga player happening, but it doesn't bother the drumming. It doesn't lock down the drumming. When you have a guy playing which is a standard conga rhythm, that kind of covers the bases and kind of leaves the jazz drummer kind of chained, but not on this record. Art Taylor had a beautiful time feel. He had a beautiful touch on the drum set, and he had tremendous facility, which you don't get to hear very often. I was listening to that record, that 2-for compilation on Prestige, Hard Cookin', I think it's called, at the store the other day, and he takes some amazing solos on that. But when he wants to solo, he's right up there with Philly Joe Jones. He had incredible facility, great ideas, super clean, but more often than not, he's happy to keep time, and sort of, he knows what his role is, and he kind of glories in it. He's a wonderful timekeeper, but he plays beautiful ideas. And he just rides, like Tony Williams, he rides over everything. You can hear him just sailing through and connecting the dots, putting down the glue, the web work for the other musicians. And this is a great one. He's on so many great Blue Note records. One of my heroes, as I've discussed a million times on this channel, is Stanley Turrentine, and yes, Easy Walker, and yes, Mickey Roker. One of the great Blue Note covers. Mickey Roker was, I think, a happy guy. It comes across in his drumming. Another guy had a lot of facility and technique, and but was always at the service of the music, never overplayed. And that's why it's sort of easy to overlook. He's on a lot of Stanley Turrentine records. He's on a bunch of Duke Pearson records. But this is my favorite. It's a track here called Meat Wave. It's an up-tempo, eighth note feel. And he's dropping all these beautiful ideas, very, very subtle, but it really pushes the arrangement forward, and he's just so musical, and has so much grace, and he can explode, he can lay in the cut. He's just the quintessential drummer, sort of like Philly Joe Jones, but a little more subtle than that, and he had a wonderful touch on the drum set. Another guy who didn't make that many records for Blue Note, well, Jack and McLean made many, many records, but this has Jack DeJohnette, Demon's Dance. Just a great, great record, recently reissued as a tone poet, and I'll take my Liberty pressing I have here any day of the week. This is 1967, and this is that time at Blue Note where things are starting to sound a little strange. Like Schizophrenia, I prefer as a tone poet because it's clean and you can hear the tone, and the color, and it's rounder. But something was happening at the end where it seems that Rudy was on his way out or didn't care as much, because you'll hear more instances of Elvin and Joe Chambers' cymbals spazzing out because doesn't have enough volume on the microphones. It's strange. But anyway, Demon's Dance is one of the great Jack and McLean records as well. It's very different. It's very tight, very focused. You know, Jack DeJohnette, very naughty drummer. The beginning of multi-directional drumming, where he's alluding to all these different phrases going on at the same time. You can really hear it come to fruition with Miles Davis, the Lost Quintet, or quite a few ECM records, Jack had a more of a blunt force touch on the drum set. He doesn't have a beautiful touch like a Kenny Clark or a Philly Joe Jones. Philly Joe Jones can be a little ragged sometimes. I'm just talking about their touch on the drum set. Somebody like Art Taylor had a beautiful, pristine feel on the drum set, which lent itself to the music. Jack's sound is knottier, heartier, funkier, more contemporary to that time, 1967. And it's interesting to hear him play on CTI records, where he's only toned down by the way they recorded him, but it's still that same punchy, nasty, gritty sound, which is really amazing. Of course, Roy Haynes on Destination, Jack and McLean, another great performance. Then I have a handful of records here that didn't make my top 10. Well, they did, but I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to find things that are representative of the great drumming on Blue Note records. One of the great Elvin records, putting it together, the Elvin Jones Trio. Equally brilliant and over the top and smashing and bashing with a really outside, balls to the wall Ornette Coleman record, New York Is Now. And again, another beautiful gatefold. You know, they should do, well, they do tone poets at gatefolds. But they don't replicate like the original artwork, do they? Like I know this hasn't come out as a tone poet, but anyway, a great trio recording, Sonny Clark with Philly Joe Jones, a one-off from the great Walter Davis Jr. with Art Taylor. Art Taylor, man, what a beast! Could play in any style. One of the greats. Another raw player, Ed Blackwell, with Don Cherry. Both came out of Ornette Coleman. And Ed Blackwell has that sense of New Orleans, that sense of history in his drumming, which you can hear really beautifully on El Corazon, the ECM record with Don Cherry. Perhaps the best recorded version of if you want to hear Ed Blackwell, because it's just, you know, his drum set is an orchestra, it's a tapestry. He gets so many beautiful sounds, weird cowbell sounds, just weirdness all over, and his incredible sense of flow. Leo Morris, aka Idris Muhammad, is amazing on several Lou Donaldson records. You know, he's really a funk drummer or a soul drummer who could play swing, but he lends that popping groove to so many records. Jackie McLean with Arthur Taylor, another great Tony Williams record, Andrew Hill, Point of Departure, another one of the great Blue Note records. Joe Chambers with Wayne Shorter, Joe Chambers with Wayne Shorter, Max Roach on Introducing Johnny Griffin. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really happy you're willing to check out my channel. I hope you can give me a subscribe and a like if you have not done so already. And if there's something you'd like me to cover in particular in the world of jazz vinyl, please put it below in the comments. I have a bunch of stuff I have to review. I have a series of Jackpot reissues. I have to do the UHQRs of two Steely Dan records. I'm hoping to get the Bill Evans records from Chad Casson to review. I have a bunch of Atlantic stuff to review, OJCs, I have a lot of stuff to review. But thanks for watching. Thanks for checking in. Bye.